Okay, so Dr. Hill Gemara. We are on Daf. Today's Daf is Daf Tasov, no? Okay. So we're learning about a lav that is preceded by an essay, if that acts as a lav, Hanitek, let's say. But Hayoim Asora Yamim, Shem Shvu Echad Shlosh Yamim Leimer. So at the bottom of Amud Beis, Rabbi Barbachana told us in the name of Rabbi Yochanan that it does not function. If the assay is before the lois assay, it does not function as a lav hanitek assay. One of the examples we had was the pasuk of Vishalchu min hamachana. So we'll see in a minute the case specifically that we're referring to. Amru loy, they asked Rabbi Yochanan, did you say that in fact? Amrit, he said, Amr loy, Amr, did you say this? Amr loy told him loy, which Rashi says Rabbi Yochanan didn't deny saying it, but he claimed that he was choizer. So Amr Rabba Alakim, Avada Amra, he said it, and I have a pasuk that has just such a case, Utanina, and our Mishnah tells us, in fact, that you do get malchus for it. Ksiva vishalchu min hamachana. So let's look at the pasuk. It says, Tzaves b'nei Yisrael, vishalchu min hamachana kol tzura v'chazov v'chol tamil nefesh. That is an assay. And then the next pasuk says, Yizocher ad nekeva tishalechu, again an assay, and then the law says, "V'lo yitamu es machaneim asher ani shoychein b'soicha." So the pasuk has a case of an assay that is before the law says, and what does our Mishnah say in that case? If someone comes into the base of English when he's tamei, it's listed as one of the items in our Mishnah that you get malchus. Tanina habala mikdash tamei, our Mishnah. So you have a clear eye that it's not a lav hanitek lasei, because if it was a lav hanitek lasei, you would not get malchus for it. Elamai time a kahaderbe. So if you see you get malchus for it, so why was Rabbi Yochanan choizer? And Rabbi Yochanan seems to say that it is a lav hanitek lasei, and you wouldn't get malchus for it. You know why he was choizer? Because he has a problem with halacha of oinus. The Tanya, a lav that's fixed, it's connected to an assay. So it says you shouldn't steal, and if you steal, the heishiv is exel shagozel. So it's a lav that's connected or undone, a lav that's undone by the assay. You don't have malchus. That's right. So Zaktim with the Tanya we learned oinus shegirish. The halacha is if someone is ma'anis a woman, it says v'loisili isha, he must marry this woman loisucha l'shachal kol yam. So first there's a mitzvah to say v'loisili isha, followed by a loisasa. And what does the Brisa say? Im Yisrael who, if he is a Yisrael who is allowed to take back a woman who he divorced, Machzer Beinalek, he takes back his wife and he doesn't get malchus. Clearly, because even though he divorced her and was over the lav, there's a lav hanitek lasei, even though the say came before the lav. Im koyenu, if this violator is a koyen, so he's not allowed to be Machzer Gerusha, right? Like he gets malchus, ve'enei machzer, and he's not machzer. So zok to Gemara im Yisraelu machzer ve'enei loike. Why? Amai loy sasa shekodmai asehu. This is a typical loy sasa where the asay came before the loy sasa. Vililki, and therefore, based on what our Mishnah is saying, that in such a case you get malchus. Why don't you get malchus if someone who is ma'anis a woman, if he divorces that woman, why doesn't he get malchus? Why do we consider it a lav hanitek lasei?
When do we consider it a lav hanitek lasei?
So that's exactly what the Gemara is going to be working on today. Now, as an aside, if a kohen divorces this woman, he's like it and he can't be machzer her. Why not? Because there's a lav. He's not allowed to marry a grusha, right? But the problem is, why isn't this an asay dechaloisase? So that's what Tosfos asks. Im koyin hu loike ben a machzer, fact Tosfos will lekal member dase asay v'doichi loisase v'asay. Well, let's see what the day says. V'doichi loisase, no, because the asay she'enei shaveh b'koil. This is an asay that's not shaveh b'koil. Doesn't apply to everybody. Why doesn't it apply to everybody? If she says, I don't want to marry him, then the only time you say that he's a chiv to marry her is if she wants to marry him. But if she doesn't want to marry him, it's a little bit presumptuous. He must marry her. Who said she wants him? Right? So if she doesn't want to marry him, there's not going to be an essay. So since it's an essay that's not shavim koil, such an essay will not be doicha of loisas. So you see by Oynes that it is a lav hanitek lasei. Amar Ula lo yoymar lo sili isha ba'Oynes. Even if it didn't say, so Ula's trying to answer, yes, you should get Makos. But the reason why you don't get Makos is because there's an extra loisili isha to tell us that normally, if that says before the loisase, you would not treat it like a lavanitik lasei, and you would get Makos. Why by Oynis do we say it's different, and we say you don't get Makos? Because there is something extra here. Because lo yomer lo isha ba'Oynis, the pasuk never needed to tell us lo isha ba'Oynis. I would have known it anyway. How would I have known it? I would have said, if a man is mochi shemer on his wife, there the Torah says he must marry her. So we should learn from there. Just like by mochi shemer, we learned that he must marry her. We'll automatically know by Oynis he must marry her. How do you see that? Uma mochi shemer. Also ma'isa. By mochi shemer, he didn't do anything to physically damage her or hurt her. He just passed a false rumor around. It was Dibur alone. Nevertheless, he must marry her. Oynis, where he actually physically damaged her, surely there should be a chiyuv for him to marry her.
By Matzah Shemra, didn't he already marry her?
Yes, he did.
So what do you mean he must marry her?
The Gemara is going to ask that kasha soon, but look, there's a mitzvah of isha. He has to remain married to her.
No.
So the Gemara uses that same. The Torah uses a similar lashon of isha, which means he must remain married to her. In fact, it's correct. So there, the Torah says isha oynis loy kol shekain. So Lama Nemar, why did the Torah speak out a mitzvah of isha by oynis when we could have figured it out without the Torah writing it? And since we don't need it as the essay commanding him to marry her, let's apply the loisiel isha by oynis that's written before the lav, and let's make believe it was written afterwards. Now it acts like a lav hanitek lasei shem giresh yachsir. If he does divorce her, there's a mitzvah lav hanitek lasei. There's a mitzvah lasei to marry her once again. That's why this is different. But normally, a lav that's preceded by an essay gets Makos. Fact Gemara, bakati oynes mimochi shemer logamar. Your whole basis that loisiel isha by oynes is extra is not extra. So your whole basis is wrong because you can't learn oynes to mochi shemer. The equal mifrich, because I can ask mali mochi shemer shekin loiku mishale. Mochi shemer is a very unique case that you can't learn from there to anything else, because it's one of the rare cases in the Torah where someone is loika and mishali, and therefore you cannot learn oynis from it. So once again, we're back to square one. Oynis is a case where the essay precedes the lois essay. Why is there no Makos? Ella lo yamar loisiel isha b'mochi shemer. Maybe the loisiel isha by mochi shemer is extra. The ligmar oynis, and I could have learned it from oynis, and I would have said uma oynis she'ena loika mishalim. So I don't need the pasuk of Eloisiel Isha by Mochi Shemra. So why is it there? Since it's not needed at Mochi Shemra, Taneu in Leonis applied Leonis, but it already says Eloisiel Isha by Leonis. Taneu in La'achrav. So very soon the Gemara is going to ask, why apply an extra Lysiel Isha to Oynis? Why don't you apply the extra Lysiel Isha to Mochi Shemra and say over there, it's like a Lavanitik Lasei. But with the Gemara will ask that soon. But Zak the Gemara, it's still a Mochi Shemra by Oynis, not really Gomer. You wouldn't be able to know that there's a mitzvah to marry this woman or stay married to this woman from Oinis, the Ikala Mifrach, Mala Oinis, Shekain Asa Maisa. By Oinis, he physically damaged her. Maybe that's why there's a mitzvah Lasil Isha. So that doesn't work. So we now need to find something extra that would say that Oinis is special, and even though normally, if the Aseh comes before the Lois Aseh, there's going to be Malchus, here it's different. It should have not said why? Shara Ishtahi, like Rabbi David just said, that it's already his wife. What do you mean Loisil Isha a mitzvah to marry her? Moiti Shemer is a woman that you are already married to. So Lama Nemar, why does it say Loisil Isha by a woman who you're already married to? We don't need it for Moiti Shemer because you're already married to her. Apply the Loisil Isha that's extra, that's found by Moiti Shemer, and apply it to Oinis. And then we don't need a Loisil Isha for Befanav, because the Torah says Beferish Loisil Isha Befanav by Oinis, so therefore apply to Acharav, and that's why it's a lav in it. Frank the Gemara, why would you apply an extra Loisil Isha that you find at Mochi Shemra? Why should you apply it to Oinis? The aim of him ain't even the fun of the Mochi Shemra to know in the Acharav the day. The Loila. Why don't you apply it to Mochi Shemra and say that by Mochi Shemra it's going to be a lav and idik lasei, and if one divorces a woman that he was Mochi Shemra on, he doesn't get Makos, rather he just marries her once again. Zok to Gemara, Eina Chanami. That is what we will do. And then the Asi Oines, the Gamar Mine. Once by Mochi Shemra, we learn that the extra Losil Isha tells us that it becomes a lav and idik lasei. We learn the whole halach of lav and idik lasei from Mochi Shemra to Oines. The my Gamar Mine. Exactly what mechanism are you using to learn Oines from Mochi Shemra? Ibe Kavachomer, Ibe Mamatzinu, Ikala Mifrach, Malamochi Shemra, Shekain Lo Yosamaisa. At the end of the day, we have already said that you can't learn anything from Mochi Shemra to Oines because Oines, Mochi Shemra has a kula of Lo Yosamaisa. Maybe that's why there's no Malchus. But by Oines, there's Yosamaisa. Maybe you do get Malchus if you divorce her. So now we're really back to square one again. Why is it that you get Malchus? Why is it that you don't get Malchus if someone divorces the woman who he was ma'anis? The assay is before the lois assay. Allah marava kol yamav ba'moid v'hachser. The loisil isha is not just an assay telling you that he must marry her. Rather, it's telling you that he must always remain married to her. As Rashi says, Allah marava hodetanya ba'oines machsur v'ein aloika. Taima, the reason is mishum dal korchoch lav shanidik lasehu. Even though the assay is mentioned before the lav by Oinis, it has to be, the only way to understand it is if it is a lav hanitik lasei. The Amar Kra Kol Yom. The Torah said, Lesucha l'shalcha Kol Yomov, Loi haba le'lamichtav ela le'yucha l'shalcha. If it's a standard lav, then what the Pasuk should have said was le'yucha l'shalcha, he's not allowed to divorce her. Why did the Torah add in Kol Yomov? My Kol Yomov. Zok Rashi, this is what the Torah means to teach us. Loi tehei b'shilucheha kol yomov. Even if you unlawfully divorce this woman, she should not remain in the state of being migureshes from you for the rest of her life. Elo yachsirena. There's a mitzvah constantly to be machzer her from the kol yomov. V'al korchach amoid v'hachzer kamer. So, by the Torah saying, Lesucha l'shacha kol yomov, don't send her away in such a fashion that she will not be your wife forever. Meaning, until you die and you don't marry her, or until something happens that you can not possibly marry her, you still haven't been over the Lesucha l'shacha. Because it's not plain Lesucha l'shacha. It's Lesucha l'shacha kol yomov. Don't send her away in such a fashion where you'll never be able to take her back. And this is how we understand the psukim by Oinis. He must marry her. Im shalcha, if he sent her away, lo yiu shilucheh l'chayama. Even though he divorces her, he wasn't over, because we're saying that the Isser is to divorce her in such a way where it will be forever. We're going to soon see how it could be forever. Like he makes a neder not to take her back, or he does something that makes it impossible for him to take her back. Harei say achar ha'avara salah. So by definition, reading the psukim by Oinus, even though chronologically the assay is mentioned before the lav, but the way the lav is said, it's in such a way where the Isser you're not over until it's a kol yom of the Shilua. So that's how we know by Oinus, even though the assay is before the Loishasa, you don't get Malkus because you're not going to violate the law unless it's a Shiluach of kol yom. So Zoktamar El Amar Rav kol yom ba'amoid v'hechser, v'chein ki also Rav and Amar Rabbi Yochanan kol yom ba'amoid v'hechser. Amalei Rapapa l'Rava. The problem is, how could you say that you would get Malkus for this? Even if the assay comes first, how could you say that you get Malkus for it? But it's not done to lav d'chasima. We know that in order for any lav to get Malkus, you compare it to a textbook case of lav. What is that textbook case? The lav that's mentioned right by the parsha of Malkus in the Torah. And that is the lav of loisachsam shor b'dishay. And any lav that's like loisachsam shor b'dishay, you get Malkus for. And any lav that's not like loisachsam shor b'dishay, you don't get Malkus for. Well, guess what? Loisachsam shor b'dishay does not have an essay before it. It doesn't have an essay after it. So therefore, any lav, even though the essay is before it, you wouldn't be able to get Malkus for because it's not done with lav d'chazima. Omar lei, so he answered back, I don't understand. Mishum the cause of beirachmana asay yisera migragara. How could you make such an argument? It doesn't change the lav. If the lav itself has a different structure, mamela. But because there's an external assay, that's completely external and separate from the lav, it should mess up the lav. That's not a svara. So tomorrow, well, ihachi lav shenidik lasay nami. So why do you say that you don't get malchus for lav shenidik lasay? Because it's not done in the lav chazima. Say the same thing. Mishum the cause of beirachmana asay yisera migragara. The assay that's after the lav is a separate thing. It's separate and disconnected and distinct from the lav. The lav itself is doima the lav d'chasima. Amarlei, no, there's a very big difference. It's not just the fact that the lav is located in the Torah after the assay, or it's not just the fact that the assay is located after the lav, that is, by lav it say. Rather, logically, the lav itself is fixing, the assay is fixing the lav. Amarlei ahulin tuke lav. Let's have a look at Rashi. Zok to Gemara. Hahu l'netuke lave also, which is the third wide line in Rashi. Asay she'ena miskayim elo la'acher avaras halav, and I say that you could only possibly do after you are over the lav, like veishav is exela shergoza. You cannot be mekayim veishav is exela before you steal. So that's a lav hanitla say. So that is lenatek es alav me oynish malchus uba. But leisucha l'shacha kol yom of leisiel isha, the leisiel isha comes before the leisucha l'shacha kol yom. That's not a alav anitik lasei. Alav anitik lasei is when it's quite clear that the say is made to fix the lav. That is not diamond to the lav d'chasima, because this is a lav that has instructions on how to fix it, and therefore you will not get malchus for it, but you will get malchus if the assay comes before the lav. Zok Gemara. Now we get into a big sugya of how to understand how a lav hanidik lasei works. There's two ways to understand why a lav hanidik lasei, or how a lav hanidik lasei works. It's either with the premise of bitloi v'loi bitloi, or with the premise of kimoi v'loi kimoi. Bitloi v'loi bitloi means you will not get malchus for the lav of a lav hanidik lasei. So, for instance, the Heshiv is exela asher gozal tells us that you will not get malchus for the avera of lesigzol until you make it bitloi, until you make it impossible to make the hashava. As long as there's still a possibility to make the hashava, you really didn't complete the lav. The lav is completed when you can no longer fulfill the assay that fixes it. So that's one approach to how a lav hanidik lasei works. Which means if someone did a lav that was Nitik Lasei, he's not Chayv Malkus. He won't be Chayv Malkus until we reach a scenario where it's impossible for him to do the Aseh anymore. At that point, he'll get Malkus for the preceding Lav. I'm going to learn Rashi. He's going to give examples. The approach of Kaimoi V'Lekaimoi is very simple. If you did a Lav, you're getting Malkus right now. Bezin says you have a choice. Either do the Aseh right now, or you're getting Malkus right now. So, Vek Gemara, the way we just explained it works out very well of Bitloi V'Lo Bitloi. Why? Because you're learning that it's Loisucha L'Shachal Kol Yomov, meaning you are not over the Lav until you made it that it was a permanent Shiluach, right? So that's clearly working with Bitloi V'Lo Bitloi, because we're saying even if you were over the Lav, we don't consider it like you're over the Lav until you're in a situation where it cannot possibly be fixed. But if you're Kaimoi V'Lekaimoi, you give him Malkus right away, unless he marries her right away. So let's see Rashi. Rashi explains this very beautifully. Hanicha leman detani bitloi v'loi bitloi. Ela leman detani kaimoi v'loi kaimoi ma'ik lememer. Had amit kol yamav ba'moid v'hachzer koi. That we wanted to learn pshat in oinus is for the rest of his life. He has a chiyuv to take her back. Then asisoi that makes him to allow. Shouldn't lasei? That made it into a lav and that's why we say, even though that say came first, we still don't give him Malkus for the loisas. And basically, what you've done is you've given him his entire life to fix that loisas by taking her back, and that will make his shiluach a shiluach of not kol yom. The problem is ula devarecha. According to this approach, hadetanya machzer ve'ein aloika is lo'ilam kama. That the Brisa told us that if a ma'anis divorces his wife, all he has to do is take her back, and he won't get Malkus. It doesn't mean he has to take her back now. It means he has for the rest of his life, even a moment before he dies. If he takes her back, there's no love anymore. As long as he can say, "I will take her back," as long as it's that possibility and that option still exists, ain't bezdin malkanoisa. So this works very well according to the Mandamar who understands the mechanics of a lav anitik is with batal esasei. If you were mevatel dasei, you made it that you can no longer possibly be mekayim dasei, then chayiv al alav. But loy batal esasei, if you were mevatel it, meaning it's still possible for you to be mekayim dasei, patu you don't come out. Shalav tolui bebital asei. You're not really completing the violation of the lav until you make it impossible to fix that say, to make that do the say. Until you yourself make it impossible for you ever to marry her back. You could still say that kol yomav yesh lo takana b'chazar. His entire life, that option is still available to him, that he can take her back, and therefore he was not, he did not violate the law. So Moti wants to know what is an example of that. Finally, Rashi says what it is. He has to make a neder that's impossible to be made for that he will never give her, he will never have enough of her. If he makes such a neder, now he can no longer marry her. So if he be a daim, creates a scenario where it's impossible for him to marry her, for instance, he made a neder that she may not have enough from him. That she may not have enough from him, and it's the type of neder that he cannot be made for because it's Aldas Rabbim or something. Now he cannot possibly do the mitzvah anymore. Now he violated. Now he's going to get malchus. That's one approach. A bitla v'la bitla. Elamandamar kayim is say potter. Like mechayiv. Why should I say tikkun shalavu? The lav you were over fully immediately. The say is now going to fix the lav. So you have an option to quickly fix it before Bezin gets their hands on you. So say tiknu tikkun shalavu. Vein alav tali b'vitla say. We're not going to say that the lav has not been completed until you mevatel da say. The moment you divorce your wife, you have completed the lav. Now you're chayiv malchus already. Now you got to see if you can get out of it. Shemisha shavar lav nigmar. Aval asay nitain lakra malchus. The asay will allow you to prevent the malchus, taprut the malchus. And therefore, when he comes to Bezdin, Bezdin will give him a choice. Or Yekayim say the Yifter, or he has to be Mekayim to say, and then he'll be put for Malchus, or Yilka. But that happens right now. Now you can't explain. Oinus works like a lavanit say, because all of his life he's in a matzav of a moed vachser. Because he's not. He has a choice right now. If you don't marry her right now, you get Malchus right now. They will give him Malchus. He doesn't have the option of, I'll get to it when I get to it. I'll marry her later. That's not an option. What's the case of loikayim? He can always say, yeah, I'm going to do it. No. Therefore, we say, if you do it right now, you don't get the Malchus. But if you don't do it right now, you will get the Malchus. So according to that approach, let's say, that will not be consistent with how we learned, we will not be able to learn that shot in Oidus. So if you learn that it's kind of like kind of. So it's not a problem. Because this whole daf Gemara, you know what we were doing? We were trying to explain the Shita of Rabbi Yochanan, who said that if the Asay comes before the Loisasa, it's not a lav and hindit lasay. So we were forced to use the mechanic of bitlay v'la bitlay, because kaimah v'la kaimah won't work to forever how Rabbi Yochanan understands Oinus. Guess what? Surprise, surprise. Midihu time at Rabbi Yochanan. All we're trying to do is understand Rabbi Yochanan. Well, guess what? Amar le Rabbi Yochanan latana tani bitlay chayiv lo bitlay potter. Rabbi Yochanan happens all bitlay v'la bitlay, so everybody's happy. It's Reish Lakish is kaimah v'la kaimah, but we're not trying to explain Reish Lakish over here. We are trying to explain Rabbi Yochanan. So today is our lucky day. Midihu time at Rabbi Yochanan. Amar le Rabbi Yochanan latana tani bitlay chayiv v'lo bitlay potter. The Tani Tana. A Ibrahim was quoted in front of Rabbi Yochanan. Paul mitzvahs loisaseh. Every mitzvahs loisaseh. Sheyesh b'kum aseh. Meaning alaf hanitek laseh. Kayei maseh sheba. Potter. If you're Makayim daseh, you're going to be potter. Bitel aseh sheba. But if you're mevatel daseh, you're going to be chayim. So this statement in and of itself is contradictory. Why? That's to my comment. I don't understand what you're saying. The statement you just made is contradictory. Because you first said kayim. If you're mekayim, I say right away you're going to be potter. Well, that would tell me loy kayim chayiv. If you're not mekayim, I say right away you're going to be chayiv malchus. And then you say bitel chayiv, which means you're only chayiv if you made it impossible to be mekayim dasei and loy bitel potter. So the question is, what is it? Do you have to be mekayim dasei right away in order to not get malchus, or you don't get malchus until you're mevatel that say where you cannot possibly do it anymore? So therefore, Rabbi Yochanan says what you should amend the brisa to is bitlay v'lo bitlay, which is exactly our shita. Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish Omer kaimoi v'lo kaimoi. Rabbi Lakish says no, it all depends. You're mechayiv right away malchus. You only can get out of it if you quickly do the assay. So let's have a quick look at Rashi. Midihu time el Rabbi Yochanan. Mi hutzrich lidroish kol yomov b'moed v'hachzer. Who had to say that? Rabbi Yochanan, right? This whole Torah that we learned in Number Aleph was just a fan for Rabbi Yochanan Shita. Normally is like an aleph. The kasher oina shagirish, and we had a problem from oina shagirish. The katadi ain't like it, where the brisa tells us you don't get malchus. So that's why so we had to use another way, another method to show that oinus is a lav hanitek lasei, even though technically the assay came before the lav. But ha'omer le Rabbi Yochanan latana lakamon later on in our Masechta tani bitlei chayiv v'loy bitlei poter. Although Rish Lakish, who learns it differently, the tani kaimoi v'loy kaimoi loy darish le lamoid v'hachser, he couldn't possibly learn by the case of oinus that the mitzvah is that you're not over the lav until you made it impossible to remarry her. Elo lefnei hagerishin. It's an essay that came before the gerushin. Loymar to tell you, kol yomov tia loy leisha v'loy shalchena. It's an essay that precedes a loisisa, and it will not be a lav hanitek lasei. Well, today lav shekot me'asei v'lav shenitek lasei shavet. according to Rish Lakish, even though the asay came before the lav, he holds that is considered a lav hanitik l'asay, and therefore bein loken aleim elikayim or asay miyad kishe yasi ru bezdin lahachser. Gewaltig. Gewaltig. So there's only one thing I want to point out before. So we're going to get into the B'makam in just a moment. We have a very important Tosfos on Tes Vav Amar Aleph. Tosfos says as follows. I'm looking at the bottom Tosfos. Hanicha leman de Omar leman de Tani bitle v'lebitle. Pirush b'Kudus. How did Rashi explain this Gemara? We just learned it. Is the koi l'shinuya the Rava the chol yamav ba'amod v'hechzer. We're analyzing whether or not Rava's teretz works. Where Rava said by Einis the mitzvah is all the days of his life he has to take her back to avoid violating l'sucha l'shacha kol yamav. V'yesh lo takana b'hachzara, and he always has the option to take her back because she'ein mevatel asay ela imkein hidira. The only way he'll actually be mevatel asay is if he made a nether that would make it impossible for him to take her back. The oz eino yochel loymar aday neseh. Now he can't tell us anymore. No, I'm going to marry her because he's already made it impossible for him to marry her by making this nether. Elalaman de Amar, Elalaman de Tani Kaim V'Lekaimoi, my Ikalamema. So b'chul the Shemaita Pirsha Kuntris, in all places, Rashi explains this line as follows: Hainu kijamasirin oisoi bezdin lakaim osei umakaim. As Rashi said here as well. Right now, they've dragged him to Bezdin, and he has not yet fulfilled that say. Bezdin gives him the option. We'll give you a choice. Either right now, fulfill that say, or right now, you're going to get Makos. Right? That's how Rashi explained it. Meaning, even if he didn't fulfill the say before he got to Bezdin, Bezdin still gives him that last chance to be Mekayim Dasei. Zok Toshis, I don't like this pshat. The Kasha, Dim Kain, if that's the case, my parach, why did the Gemara ask over here? The Lamand Amar Kaim V'Lekaimoi Eine Kol Yomov. B'Moed V'Hechzar, it's not true. Hashaper Mishkachas Law, the Hava B'Amoed V'Hechzar, Kolkamet Lebezdin. Until he got to Bezdin, he didn't violate the assay because Rashi says that he has up until Bezdin gives him that option. So from when he was Ma'anisr till when Bezdin is giving him the option, could be a month, could be 2 months. So you see, there is still a span of time where he could still be Mekayim the assay and fix it. While Rashi says also he was already over the lav. If he was already over the lav, he shouldn't be able to fix it at all. L'kach nira zoktoisus the mikri kaimoi. There's a little bit of a chiddush. It's not called being Mekayim it. Eladavko kishemekayim asay acher she'over alav v'toich kedei dibur. Kaimim v'lekayim means not like Rashi says. Bezdin gives him the option. Rather, unless he immediately after he did the alav, after he divorced her, he immediately remarried her, he will get Makos no matter what. Now that's a little bit shver because umiyuk taskosha dimkein tzarich lefarish. Now you have to explain. The Brisa says that if you divorce your wife and you were ma'anis her before, right, and then you divorce her, you machzer, you take her back the einaloika. What does it mean machzer einaloika? You're going to have to learn that machzer miyad betoich kedei dibur acher gersh, and that's a little bit difficult to understand. But I'll call upon them. I just wanted to highlight that difference in understanding of what does it mean kaimim v'lakaimoi, if you have to do it right away, or if it's just an option that Bezdin gives you when Bezdin is about to give you Malchus for divorcing the wife. What is the machloikis? In what does the machloikis between Reb Shimon ben Lakish, who understands the mechanics of alav and nizlasei with kaimoi v'lakaimoi, and the mechanics of how Rabbi Yochanan understands alav and nizlasei? What exactly are they arguing about? What is the point of contention? Really, it's a question of asra sofik. Mar savar asra sofik shema asra, umar savar asra sofik lav shema asra. what in the world does Asra Suffolk have to do with a lav hanitik lasei? So let's have a look. The first wide line in Rashi. Rabbi Yochanan Sover Hasra Suffolk Shema Asra. Zok Rashi. The Aval Gav. The Choloisas Hashanitik lasei lidvorav Hasra Suffolk. According to Rabbi Yochanan, who's bitloi v'lebitloi, a guy's about to violate a lav by divorcing his wife. So you want to give him Asra, if you divorce her, you're going to get Malchus. That's not true. If you divorce her, you might get Malchus. Because if you divorce her, you don't get Malchus unless you take a next step and you make it impossible to marry her again. So that's Asra Suffolk. Because when you're telling him, if you divorce your wife, you're going to get Malchus, you're not so sure about that. When he's about to divorce his wife, he has to be warned. The who Amar, Shagamar Halav, the bit laseitali. The problem is Rabbi Yochanan says that he didn't violate the law until he made it impossible to mimikayim dasei. And therefore, uchisha masrin boy al tegarish, don't divorce your wife. Suffolku. The person who warning this fellow is only misuffic. If that warning is valid, keshema lo yivatel esoasei ladir bano. He might divorce her, but he might not ever be madir bano, which means he never really violated dasei, which means the guy's never going to get the malchus. Ulich isha yadira v'yivatlenu ka'amar deloki. Yes, if he eventually makes an Israel no, then he'll get malchus. But right now, when he's warning him before the gerushin, it's a hasra sofik. Yet Rabbi Yochanan holds it will still work. Alma hasra sofik shema asra. Rabbi Yochanan has to hold hasra sofik shema asra. So therefore, you could never possibly get malchus for divorcing your wife if you have this lav hanit lasei, you have this assay making it into a shrasa. Therefore, he's forced to learn hilchach im haya gamar halav im haya gamar halav totally bevitl hasei. If in fact the gamar halav was totally in only making it impossible for him to remarry her, lo haya lekalov. It would never be possible to get malchus for the Yisr of Lesucha L'Shalcha. Ela halav mishagirish nigmar. Rather, a Shlokish has to hold that the moment you give her the gerushin, you violated the lav and you're liable for malchus. And therefore, v'havelah hasras vaday. It's a hasras vaday. If you divorce her, you're chayv malchus right now. V'asei nitin lias tachas a malchus. That doesn't undo the fact that you're over the lav. The asay just is a kapara. Instead of getting malchus, we'll have you do the asay. But you for sure violated and completed the loisasay. And therefore, sheyavei lebezin, or yekayim or yilaka. The kasha frek Rashi, Rabbi Yochanan nami ikalamei Rav Asras Vaday. Why don't you say according to Rabbi Yochanan, it's also in the Asras Vaday? When will you do the Asras Vaday? The Yisruba kishabalavatl es asay shakir salav. Maybe you never give him Asra when he's about to divorce her. Because in Echanami, that's Asra Sovik. But when he's about to make the nether, maybe give him the Asra then. That never works. Because the Asra has to be while he's being over the lav. The Asra has to be at the time that he's doing the gerushin. Even though you're not really over the lav until you make it impossible to marry her, it doesn't matter. The actual lav is divorcing her. That's where the hasra must occur. Like we're going to learn soon in Masechah Shavuos. Shavuos shaloi oichal kikar zu im oichal zu. I have two pieces of cake. I have a sponge cake and a chocolate cake. And I make a shvuah. I'm not going to eat the sponge cake if I eat the chocolate cake. So what is the isser? The isser is the sponge cake. I'm not going to eat the sponge cake. But the isser depends on if I eat the chocolate cake. So the halach is what if I ate the t'nai? I ate the chocolate cake. And then I ate the sponge cake. That's our Suras Vaday. Because right before I'm about to eat the sponge cake, the Edom are going to warn me. Yosy, don't forget, you already ate the chocolate cake. So it's also for you to eat the sponge cake. If you eat the sponge cake, you're going to be over. But what happens if Achal Yisure? First, I ate the sponge cake. I had not yet eaten the chocolate cake when I ate the sponge cake. So at the time that I ate the sponge cake, there's no problem. But then v'hadar achal tanoi, if then I go eat the chocolate cake later on, at the time that I ate the sponge cake, it would have only been a hasra sofik, because you don't know yet if I'm going to eat the chocolate cake. Alma hasra b'shas iser be'inan. So what do you see from here? That the hasra has to be by the lav. V'afal pi she'ein alav nigmar at sheyochel es shotnai. Even though you don't really complete the lav until the Tanai makes that lav osir, you need to give hasra at the lav. So therefore, it will not work according to Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan must hold hasra sofik shema hasra. Mishlakish holds hasra sofik lo shema hasra. So Zok the Gemara, b'ma kamifli basra sofik kamifli martav hasra sofik shema hasra u'martav hasra sofik lo shema hasra v'oslo tamei. And in fact, we have another case where they argue just in this case of hasra sofik. Didmar shvuah she'oichel kikar zayoyim. I made a shvuah. I will eat this kikar today. The over ayoyim, and the day passed. V'lo yachla. Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish both agree. Damar tavayu ein eloika. They both agree you don't come malchus, but they each have a different reason for why you don't come malchus, which is totally nasrasov. Rabbi Yochanan ein eloika. You know why you don't come malchus? Mishum da'ave lav shein b'maisa. This is a lav that you don't make a maisa to violate. By not eating, you violated. So you cannot get malchus if you're over a lav that there's no mice involved. A lav shein b'maisa ain't like an lav, but not because it's a hasra sofik. Rish Lakish ein eloika mishum da'ave hasra sofik. V'chol asra is sofik loy shmo asra. Why is it asra sofik? So I can't tell you whether you better eat it because maybe you'll eat it later, right? Every time I warn you, if you don't eat it, you're going to get malchus. It's not true. If you don't eat it now, you can still eat it later. As Rashi said, "Mishum avla asra sofik al mishum lav shein b'maisa lo have a mifter." Lav shein b'maisa, according to Rish Lakish, wouldn't pat you. The kesher lav shein b'maisa like an lav. Okay, so we have now we have an established machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish if asra sofik shema asra or not. That will dictate whether or not you could explain the mechanics of a lot of an say as bitloi v'lo bitloi or as kaimoi v'lo kaimoi. And since Rabbi Yochanan knows bitloi v'lo bitloi, it explains perfectly how he understands the lav and the say of oinus that leisucha l'shalcha kol yomov. You're not over for being mishalech your wife unless it's a permanent sending her away, meaning you've made it impossible to remarry her. Okay, we'll stop here with Mamshech tomorrow.